Conversation, or maybe we're not starting, we're continuing a conversation and diving into the energy wallet, to air quality, and to geospatial mapping as it relates to the Oregon Energy Strategy. Next slide, please. So in case folks are not familiar with WebEx, here is an overall view of how to use it. If you ever have any problems, you're welcome to pop off mute and let us know, or you can use the chat to say that you're having an issue. And if that doesn't work, then you're also welcome to email me and I'll check there too to see if I can help you out. Next slide. These are the group agreements that we've been working with so far, and I would like everyone to just keep them in mind. You know, we're going to be listening carefully. We're listening to understand. We're being respectful, candid. Let's stick to constructive conversation. We might disagree with the content, but we can still be kind and respectful to each other and always keep an open mind. If you have clarifying questions, please feel free to ask those. And I think, you know, this is the last one I think that's important here is be conscious of your speaking time. We're gonna step up if we're usually one of the quieter people. I'd love to hear from you today. And if you're someone who speaks up often, still keep on speaking. Just be mindful that other people might need that extra minute before they jump into a conversation. Next slide. We're going to be a little tight on time today, I think, because we've got a lot of conversation to get to. So we're going to do our introductions in the chat today. So if you would please add your name, any affiliations that you want to share, your pronouns if you're comfortable sharing them. I don't think I said mine earlier. I use she and they pronouns. And just a quick, how are you welcoming in autumn? Would love to hear that. I'm loving the season. And as everyone's doing that, Mary, you can head to the next slide. Here's our agenda today. Like I said, we're going to be jumping in pretty quickly to our energy wallet, health impacts. I think I said air quality before, excuse me, health impacts and geospatial mapping. And we're joined by a brilliant team today from the Clean Energy Transition, from Rockcrest Consulting, Mariah, who is a Community Research and Action doctoral candidate, and folks from Evolved Energy Research. We're going to get through this. We're going to have a lot of conversation, and then we'll wrap up with some next steps by 10:30. And then I'm just noticing these cooler mornings, smells of fall, lighting candles, sweater weather. So many delicious goodies. Look, I love some pumpkin spice. I'm fine with it. That's who I am. Yes, let's all stay cozy. Oh, thanks everyone for sharing that. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ruby.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. And hello. Good morning. Go to the next slide. I am just providing a bit of overview before we get into each of these individual analyses. Next. And this is something you have all seen before, I think, but just to refresh and kind of get us grounded on the same page, we are talking about these complementary analyses to the energy modeling. So starting with the energy modeling, what we're looking at here on the screen, we've already done that red box, the feedback on reference scenarios and what if scenarios. We are working on the energy modeling on our team, and we'll have results. Next, Mary. And those results will feed into this energy wallet analysis that you'll hear more about in a moment. And some of the feedback there is about what customer groups we want to look at. And next, the results will also feed into air quality modeling, which we'll also talk about today, looking at how the changes in air quality affect health outcomes. And some feedback there is about the geography, the geographic granularity of that modeling. And next, On a parallel track, we're doing some geospatial mapping, which we will also look at today. And the feedback there is which of the indicators, the socioeconomic or energy burden, et cetera, are highest priority to include in this mapping. And next, we'll talk a little bit about how the mapping, how we see the mapping contributing to those policy conversations by helping to interpret some of the results on that left side of the screen, the results from the energy modeling or from the energy wallet and from the air quality model. You can go to the next slide. In terms of a timeline, I know we've had, this is our fourth meeting with this group, and we had a pretty packed August full of meetings. But I wanted to give a sense of the next few months just with regard to these complementary EJ and equity analyses. So in yellow, those are the working group opportunities or involvement. And then in red, that's the CETI and ODO work. So if you see over there on the left, the first yellow diamond is today, this working group meeting focused on energy wallet health impacts and geospatial mapping. Our team will then write up a straw proposal of these three analyses based on what we hear today. So we have a really good starting place today, but we're still open to modifying that based on what you all tell us. And so we'll write something up by the end of this month and send it out. And then we would love feedback on that a few weeks later by that November 22nd date. And then we will take that feedback and incorporate it into a final approach to share with, it says the working group, it'll actually be shared with everyone on the website again, I think, by the end of December or December 20th. And then that'll set us up to actually perform and do these analyses in January, which will lead into the policy conversations and development of recommendations in early 2025. So this is what we're thinking in terms of a timeline, and we'll come back at the very end to remind you when we talk about next steps and kind of wrap it up. Pause there if there are any clarifying questions, but otherwise I think we can dive in. Lauren, is there anything in the chat? Just a lot about pumpkins, bread, ooh, fall runs.
Lots of good fall stuff.
Love it. Okay, I am handing it over to Jeremy now for the energy wallet.
Thanks, Ruby. So I will give an introduction to the approach that we're taking here, and then Angela is going to present some ideas for how we might characterize different customers that we model with this approach. So we move to the next slide. So the energy wallet concept here is to try and capture what are the costs to customers of the energy that they're using. And this includes everything. So electricity bills are often the thing that we're talking about, but at the same time, customers are purchasing gasoline and diesel and fuel oil. And so it's looking across the whole spectrum of different types of energy that are used in homes, in vehicles, and how those might change over time. So if we're using more electricity in the future, then the total dollars that we're paying towards electricity would increase, but at the same time, we're avoiding having to purchase other fuels. And so they're decreasing. And how do those things kind of play together? So questions that we're looking at through this are questions like, how is total energy spending different for different customer types? What is the impact on customers investing in electrification earlier or later? And how is energy burden impacted? So we move to the next slide. And here I'm showing a couple of examples of this type of analysis that come from other places. So on the top chart there, what we're looking at are estimated energy expenditures by household per year. And this is from another state. And so it's showing in the blue the investments made or the payments for electricity services, and then in the gray the other types of fuels that are being consumed. and fossil liquids, that's primarily gasoline in vehicles. If we're in that baseline case, nothing much is changing as we're going forward in time, and so the split between electricity and other types of fuels is remaining somewhat similar. If we're in one of those scenarios that is shooting towards emissions reductions, like the net zero economy wide case, then the amount paid towards electricity services is increasing quite a lot, because more and more of the end use services at the customer level are being provided by electricity, but at the same time, fossil liquids, fossil gas are decreasing in cost. And in this particular example, overall, the costs for energy decreased about 20% by the time we got to 2050. So this lets us examine temporal impacts of clean energy adoption, things like electric vehicle adoption, of heat pump adoption. It's also allowing us to look at, if customers are investing in those technologies in different years, what might the impact of that be? And that's the bottom example there, where we have the year in which a customer is purchasing an electric vehicle. So if they purchase an electric vehicle in 2022, then it's more costly than the equivalent gasoline vehicle. And so their costs as a percentage of their 2022 costs are much higher. If we move forward in time, they're purchasing an electric vehicle in 2030, then that's kind of the sweet spot. Their costs are the lowest if they purchase it in that year. If they purchase it later, then their costs are higher, because now we are past that point where electric vehicles have reached parity with internal combustion engines. And so this allows us to look at the impacts on customers of both the transition in general towards lower emissions, towards cleaner electricity, and also the impact of different customer decisions over time on what kind of equipment they're purchasing. So in this analysis, we're going to look at up to 5 different customer types to do this type of analysis. And we are in the process of trying to develop what the definitions of each of those customers are. And so we have some proposals for that, and that's what our team is going to summarize for you now. And I'll pass it over.
Thank you, Jeremy. Can we go to the next slide, please? So, hi, I'm Angela Long with Rockcrest Consulting. I think this is the first time that I've spoke to this group, but I've been in all of the workshops to date and have really taken a role of active listening, trying to hear what this group has said along with the other groups, and thinking about that in the context of the energy wallet and the customer groups. And throughout the workshops, I've heard themes of public health and safety, like how do we think about air quality, thinking about different building types, everything from manufactured homes to renters, manufactured homes to multifamily. Really thinking about location, the differences between coastal versus rural. And hearing all of these different themes, I was really trying to think, like, how do we get that into the customer groups? I mean, we have technologies, we have buildings, we have people. And so I wanted to start with just coming up with a baseline of what a building would look like. If you're familiar with the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, or also known as NEA, they have a regional building stock assessment that they do every few years called the RBSA. That RBSA was recently done in 2022 and is really rich, has a lot of data. It has everything from number of people living in a home, different types of homes across the Northwest, energy consumption, square footage, windows, like you name it, they do a lot in that survey. And so I went to NEA's data set and started to look at homes specifically in Oregon and tried to look at different factors, things like location, age of building, types of home ownership, and integrate that into the 9 customer groups that you see here. And we'll have an opportunity to vote on these or prioritize the different customer groups, but I'd like to just walk through them at a high level for you so you can get a sense of the different ways that we're thinking of the customer groups. So the first one is the average homeowner. That's just taking the RBSA data and looking at a single family detached home across Oregon and its total annual consumption across all fuel types. And all fuel types includes things like oil, wood, electric, natural gas. So we can think of that as like our baseline or our reference point for what a homeowner, average homeowner looks like in Oregon. And then the next three are really location based. We have rural, coastal, and a high priority area. If you're familiar with Odo's 10-year plan looking at housing affordability, they did a study where they prioritized different counties within the state and ranked them based on a variety of different metrics, everything from energy burden and those high priority areas. I was able to integrate them or map them to the RBSA data and then come up with consumption. The rural and coastal homes, the RBSA data is pretty limited. It's either west of Oregon or east of Oregon or rural or urban. So I used the Regional Employment Office. They have a map for Oregon of different counties, and then also used Odo's regions and looked at different counties and classified them as rural or coastal, and then came up with the consumption for those building types. The next customer group that we have here is a single family home with income less than 15,000. The RBSA data did have income data in there, so I was able to use that income data and then come up with what we'll call severe energy burden. The next group we have is weatherization. So those are homes built prior to 1990 that we're assuming have low insulation or poor insulation, and as a result, will pay higher costs for their energy. And you can see they actually do have higher energy usage. We have manufactured homes. The one thing I want to note about this is the RBSA sample size for manufactured homes is it's really small. I think it was 30 maybe across the Northwest and maybe 5 for Oregon. So this is the only customer group that is not Oregon specific. It is regional. But this is the average manufactured home. And part of Odo's study in their 10-year plan, they assumed I should mention this earlier, the study was done with ETO. And as part of that study, they saw that 70% higher average cost for manufactured homes than other homes. So that is assumption that we'll make within that customer group if we choose it. And then we have average renter across a single family home, and then we have low income renter for multifamily. So those are the groups that we'll look at in a minute. Once we've decided on the 5 groups, can we go to the next slide, please? We'll need to come up with some additional analysis for the annual energy cost, the vehicle miles traveled, the cost for those vehicle miles traveled, and then we'll calculate energy burden. And we'll use a couple other data points for coming up with that. We'll use the RBSA data to come up with building size and then map that up to the US Energy or EIA energy cost per square foot. EIA actually calculated energy insecurity for a variety of different types of buildings and then socio and economic data. So we actually have costs for those different customer groups that we could use. And then we'll do county level data for the vehicle miles traveled, and we'll map that up to the US Bureau of Transportation's per mile cost. And so once we have those data points, then Jeremy's going to be able to integrate it into the model, and he'll be able to do those different energy futures or scenarios like he mentioned earlier. So I'll pause there and open it up to questions, and then we can, if we don't have any questions, we can move over to prioritizing which groups we would like to see in modeling.
There was a chat. Oh, sorry. Someone else going.
Go ahead, Lauren.
I was just gonna say there was a chat question from John clarifying, was wondering which of the 5 scenarios was used to calculate household costs in the second chart that Jeremy had shown. And Jessica clarified in the chat that that data Jeremy was showing is not based on Oregon data. It's just an example of another study that the firm did for Wisconsin. So to clarify that part. And sorry, I didn't see who I interrupted, so jump back in.
We don't have any questions. We can go to the next slide. And here we would like to have everyone join Menti and be able to prioritize your top 5 customer groups. And so how long do we want to give people to vote on these? A couple minutes, maybe, Lauren?
Yeah, I think we'll be able to kind of see how they start moving and if they start slowing down, right?
And if anyone has any issues logging on to Menti, just let us know. But we can jump in here, and if we need to go back to the previous slide to look at the definitions, just let us know. We could do that too. Okay, clarify. There's a question in the chat to clarify the high priority areas for Odo. So I believe, and anyone from Odo, please jump in and correct me. The study was done in 2020 or 2019. It was a 10-year plan looking at reducing energy burden in Oregon's affordable housing. And that 10-year plan looked at, was done with, I should say, the Housing and Community Services and ETO, as well as the Oregon PUC. And they looked at different counties to come up with a high priority score, and it was 1, 2, and 3. And the higher the number, the higher housing burden you had. And they looked at a variety of different factors, everything from socioeconomics to cost. And so basically number 4, which is the high priority area, is taking the data from that study and looking at the consumption of those homes in those high priority county areas. Does that answer your question? I think that was from Jess.
Yeah.
Okay. So it looks like we're pretty, even though the numbers are changing, it seems like rural homes, severe energy burden, manufactured homes, and low income renters are still kind of at the top there. So that's great. So the next steps are going to take the energy group, or sorry, the 5 groups here that we prioritized, and then build additional analysis that I mentioned previously, the vehicle miles traveled, the cost, and then be able to share that out. And Ruby, I forget what your date was on your timeline, but we'll be sending that out, I think, this month is the goal.
Yeah, I said by the end of this month.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you for your time. Feel free to throw any questions in the chat and I can help answer them. And I will turn it over to, I think Mariah's next, or is that Jeremy?
Back to Jeremy for air quality first.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Angela. So the next module here is talking about the air quality analysis that we're going to do. And this is something that links into the outputs we get from modeling the whole economy. So what kind of technologies are people adopting on the demand side, whether they're driving an electric vehicle or an ICE vehicle? And then how are we supplying that energy? So what are the point sources of emissions that our energy is coming from, as well as the other point and non-point sources of emissions in the economy that can contribute to air quality impacts. So we go to the next slide. Our models, Energy Pathways and RIO, can be divided into demand side and supply side. Energy Pathways is mostly about how does the demand side evolve over time? What are the stocks of different technologies? What are the service demands being met by those technologies and the emissions associated with using those? And then RIO is how do we supply that energy? And we're monitoring the changes in emissions from the energy supply. And that includes all types of emissions and pollutants. And that is tied into the EPA COBRA model. COBRA model is a collection of, or kind of a meta model of different fate transport models on the air quality side. And so by putting in different inputs, then we can assess what the changes in air quality in different sectors of the state would look like. So we take the changes in our point and non-point source emissions. Those are inputs into our air quality scenarios. And through COBRA, we can look at what are the overall changes in air quality. That includes particulate matter. It also includes ozone impacts on health. Then what are the health outcomes associated with that? And what are the economic benefits of improving those health outcomes? Next slide. This is showing an example from a previous study in the Northwest that we did, Net Zero Northwest Energy Pathways analysis on the types of outputs that we might see coming out of this analysis. The example here is for avoided deaths per million people, and it shows avoided deaths across the Northwest states for 2030, 2050. Oregon there is in the blue color. But there are other metrics associated with improving air quality as well, like fewer lost work days, fewer hospital admissions, other economic benefits. And we'll be reporting out both these metrics and also the economic impacts that improvements in these metrics would result in. Move to the next slide. We are breaking down Oregon into different zones to be able to look at air quality impacts. And so to do this, we're going to cluster the different counties based on a few different metrics here. So on the right-hand side, we've listed different variables that we can weight the clustering algorithm by to define what are the zones that we will look at. These include average temperatures in January, August, average number of vehicles, fine particulate matter. So what are the starting points for average number of fine inhalable particles, average percent of community members living at or below federal poverty level, average percent of adults with asthma. So our question to this group is, do these make sense? And are there other things that we would want to cluster on for air quality modeling? Next slide. So I will open it up to questions and see if anybody has feedback for us.
I know that in the past, we've been having quite a few conversations about the geography and what that approach looks like. So I'm wondering if people are feeling okay about that map or if there's other thoughts that they have. And I see that Rear, you have a question in the chat. Did you want to come off mute? Or I'm happy to read it out if you would like to stay on mute.
I just was saying that if it wasn't included in the last slide talking about the like percentage or like number of unhoused people that are maybe, you know, exposed to poor air quality.
Thank you, Greer. Appreciate that feedback. And yes, here's the lots of pluses for that comment, Greer. John, I'm seeing you in the chat. Did you want to come off mute for it, or happy to read it?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. This is totally just like my intuition, so I don't know how true this is. In my mind, I imagine Hood River County getting more wildfire smoke annually than Multnomah. That might be totally wrong, but I'm wondering if wildfire smoke has been included in the clustering.
At present, we don't have it included in the clustering here. It is potentially something that we could put in there. But the way that the Cobra model works is that it is including the air quality impacts of natural sources like wildfires, but it's not something that we will be able to capture changes in the rate of wildfires going forward in time. And so it's kind of a constant underpinning, but there isn't that climate change impact built into the model. There is also no feedback. So the things that we do on the energy side or the economy side, they don't have any impact on the air quality that's driven by those natural sources. And so to the extent that there are areas of the state where that is the primary reason why air quality is lower, then the things that we do on, vehicle electrification, for example, will likely have less of an impact on air quality metrics than in other places where wildfires are less of a concern.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's helpful. I guess, yeah, obviously it's like really hard to know exactly how climate change is going to pan out and how wildfires will increase. I do wonder if there's like, I'm not quite sure how this fits into the energy strategy, but like when I'm just thinking about like cumulative impact, and how there can be certain like nonlinear effects based on amount of pollution. Is there a way to somehow like continue to account for wildfire trends as this stuff is like put into action in the next couple decades?
I think it needs primary research on how those two things are related in Oregon, the rate of climate change and increase in wildfires, that is not in the data sets that are underpinning the very complex air quality modeling that the Cobra model is meta modeling. So it kind of is, it would be amazing if we could do that, but I think it's a separate study, which would be quite an involved thing to do. But one that, would be extremely valuable if that data could be developed.
Well, yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Jeremy.
I also want to, sorry. Jessica, did you have more to?
I just wanted to add to this discussion, which is even if the model can't take in this information, I know that there are maps. Mariah mentioned one through this First Street Foundation, and that Forestry, in conjunction with the Oregon State University, has also produced a wildfire risk map for Oregon. And at the very least, I think we could overlay some of the data that we have with those maps in a way to at least tease out part of the story of what's going on there. So these are really good questions, and I want people to also think a little outside the box when it comes to things that maybe can't be incorporated into the model.
Alessandra, I wanted to also uplift what you put into the chat, that there are high fire risk zones that are already grouped in IOU wildfire mitigation plans. If you wanted to say more, please do, but no pressure.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the plans again, but they're usually very granular. I think they go even deeper than the county level. They're mostly just restricted to the investor-owned utilities service area. So I know consumer-owned utilities are also doing some wildfire mitigation, but not sure if they also have the same kind of setup of having these located high fire risk zones. But I think it's a good place to check out. And I mean, the utilities also capture when they have to de-energize their lines for wildfire risk. And so that's always captured to when people are going through these public safety power shutoffs or other type of shutoffs that I think kind of show as well of the places that are most susceptible for impacts on wildfires during the summer, and also in Portland during, for instance, the ice storms when the power was being shut off. It's not so much, I guess, on air quality, let's say, but I think this data kind of shows where the energy grid could be more vulnerable, which kind of shows different types of impacts that could happen that I think overall shows some of the vulnerabilities of certain communities over others.
Thank you, Alessandra. I think that really, your point really gets to what Jessica is saying, that, you know, we can start thinking about things outside the box. And while we might not see the direct relation to a model here, there's really important information to gather that's relevant for the totality of the conversation. Anybody else have I don't see anything else in the chat, but if there's any other thoughts.
Jump in with one additional about on this.
Yeah, please.
So there was a question about impacts of wildfire smoke, and in particular around Hood River versus the other counties it's clustered with. And I guess I just wanted to highlight that the fine particulate matter here, PM 2.5 data, should reflect some impacts from wildfires historically. It doesn't differentiate like why the PM 2.5 is what it is in each county, but it sort of combines sort of all of the things that are contributing to fine particulate matter, including wildfire in the historical record. And so I was just looking at that data as this conversation was going on, and Hood River's PM 2.5 is a bit lower than the counties that it's clustered with. So there's probably some offsetting factors there, but I just wanted to highlight that it is sort of captured, though not perfectly, by these metrics, sort of despite the limitations of what the modeling can do on wildfires.
Thank you, Elaine. I do see that Sarah has added to the chat. Sarah, did you want to come off of mute?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was a reason that it was for number 6, that it was the average % of adults with asthma and not inclusive of like children, and what does it mean to be an adult? Is it like 18 till forever? And why that would be decided?
Yeah, I can speak to that. The data is from CDC Places, which is a national data set that they put out. And it's only collected, I think, from adults. So it's like individuals 18 and over. So yeah, I don't think they have data on children, unfortunately.
Sarah, I would say too that if it's something that you're interested in, if anyone has data that you think would be relevant in sharing, then we'd also be happy to hear more about that, what's out there, and we'll keep looking too. And then Jess, I see your question in the chat. Happy to have you come off mute if you feel comfortable with that.
Sure. I was just thinking about how large industrial polluters contribute to changes in pollution, even at a neighborhood scale, not just number of cars, which I think is also really, or annual traffic. I think that's really a useful metric as well. But curious if that plays a role, especially thinking about how some larger point source polluters may be located in more rural areas where that impact of significant traffic may not capture the air quality issues happening in those areas.
Yeah, so those are included, but it's sort of broad brush in that it's looking at PM 2.5 concentrations in grid squares of a certain size. So to the extent that large polluters are impacting particulate matter in that grid square over a large region, then that's factored in. What we're not picking up, and is quite a large impact from a PM 2.5 perspective, is how close people are living to particular sources. And I would say it's less the industrial that does play a role, but particularly people that are living close to highways. That is something that we're not picking up, but has a huge impact on health outcomes. And so there are other much more localized effects that this modeling is not a level that we could get to.
I would add that at the county level, it's not listed here, but we did also consider which counties the largest point sources were located in the clustering analysis. And the one that was sort of challenging to characterize and cluster because of that was Klamath. And so it's been grouped here with the rest of Southeast Oregon, but it's unique in that it has a large point source. And so I was curious to hear if anybody had thoughts on whether it should be clustered with those other counties to its east, or whether there's value in differentiating air quality in Klamath.
It looks like we have another question from Sarah. Sarah, if you wanted to come off and ask your question.
Sure. I don't know how this would, if it would at all fit into any of these, into an actual variable, but something I'm just noticing and looking at this is it seems like there's a lack of consideration of like racial disparities that we know exist related to air quality risks and health impacts. And so I'm just wondering, we're looking at average percent of community members living at or below federal poverty level, but we know, research has shown that even when controlling for income, folks from BIPOC communities can be more likely to suffer a greater risk. So just something that I feel like maybe is missing. I don't know, but I don't know if it can be added. So just a thought.
I can speak to that, or Jeremy, if you want to.
No, go over it, Maria.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think that's totally a great addition. And you're totally right that like even when controlling for income, race and ethnicity has a huge impact. There are certainly different variables I could add. I personally am a little bit hesitant to do like one BIPOC like variable because I think different races and ethnicities have different experiences. And so but I'd be happy to do like a percentage of Black non-Hispanic, percentage of Hispanic, and percentage of white, percentage of it, like the different race variables, if that's valuable. Yeah, I'm happy to like think and iterate on that. And if y'all have thoughts, yeah, do feel free to share them.
Thanks, Mariah. There were a couple of thumbs ups that came through while you were talking. Are there any other thoughts or questions around this piece? Okay, if there are, if you come to something later on, it's not too late. You can still name it as we go. And I think we're ready to move along.
Yeah, so I'll be talking about the geospatial mapping component, which we're really, I think, hoping to use in tandem with a lot of the results from both the energy wallet and the COBRA modeling piece. Next slide. So as I mentioned, I think a while back, I have a current sort of drafted approach, which has roughly 47 justice-related variables for all 992 census tracts in Oregon. And my goal was really to use information from 2018 to 2022. This is coming from sources like the US EPA, the US Department of Transportation, the Census Bureau, the Department of Energy, and CDC, as I mentioned. And my goal also was to use a really replicable approach with open source data and code that can be shared widely so that it can be updated with time using some of those new data sets, because oftentimes they are released on an annual basis, so we can have the most up-to-date data. And I think the value in developing sort of like an Oregon specific data set is that we can then create our own like Oregon specific indicators at the community level. So we can oftentimes identify communities with the most pressing needs in the state for potential policy implementation. Next slide. This is one example map, and it's showing two variables. One is PM 2.5, and the other is the percentage of adult asthma. So it's showing, it's called a relationship map, and it shows, yeah, these two variables, right? So the blue would show, or yeah, blue would show low instances of adult asthma, but high instances of PM 2.5. The sort of yellower green would show high instances of PM 2.5, but low instances of adult asthma. And that darker green would show high instances of both cases. And this is using data from the CEJST tool, as well as information from the Centers for Disease Control. Next slide. Another example map that we created was looking at energy burden and percentage of mobile homes. Again, it's a relationship map, so you're seeing sort of the two variables intersect. And I mentioned being able to sort of develop like Oregon specific indicators. So you can sort of calculate statistics, right? Like there are 161 census tracts in the 75th percentile for both energy burden, meaning that more than 5% individuals in the 75th percentile have energy burden that is greater than 5%. And the percentage of households living in mobile homes, meaning that those individuals or that community has greater than 12% of families living in mobile homes. And those are tracts maybe that would represent communities that could be prioritized for equitable home and energy investments. Next slide.
Mariah, I have a quick question.
Oh, yeah.
In that example, how did y'all determine come to 5%? Was that like, is that this like the state median energy burden, or
Yeah.
kind of high, but I wasn't sure.
No, that's a great question. Sorry. So these are all relating to the 75th percentile, right? So it's the top 25th percentile of energy burden is 5%. So you're looking at 5% and above for that top 25th percentile. Does that answer your question? And the same for mobile homes.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for clarifying. Next slide. Oh yeah. Sorry, and this is the last static map that I had created that is showing percent home ownership and percent homes that are at 0 to 80% of average median income. And this might represent households that could be prioritized for Inflation Reduction Act incentives at the household level. So oftentimes in the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of the incentives for households have like additional sort of prioritized funds for homes that are at that 0 to 80%. So again, right, I was looking at the 75th percentile for both home ownership, meaning that it's the top 25th percentile for people who own their homes, and the top 25th percentile for homes that are prioritized for IRA incentives, meaning that in this case, more than 81% of households in a community meet those AMI income eligibility requirements. Next slide. And as I mentioned, right, there are roughly like 50 or so indicators that I've sort of pulled together in our initial draft. I think we circulated a draft of those indicators a while back, and I'd be happy to circulate it again if anyone's interested. But these are sort of examples of potential indicators that could be included in our potential geospatial mapping approach. So you're looking at I don't know, sort of themes of customer and system resiliency, themes of economic and environmental aspects, energy equity, and health and well-being. Next slide. And this is, hopefully we'll get some feedback on this. And I would love to have sort of like verbal feedback too, in terms of like whether or not those relationship maps are helpful, or if y'all would rather just see like one variable at a time. But yeah, we're going to open up this Menti. And if you open up the code, it's hard because there are like 50 or, you know, several indicators that hopefully people can see at the same time while they're, can we show both? I don't know. Yeah, if you need to go back and see the list of indicators, let us know. But yeah, hopefully we'd love some feedback. Sarah, I see your comment on the economic section. I think that's a great thought. I have information about folks employed in like agriculture and natural resources. So if that would be a valuable add, I could definitely do that.
Are we just shouting stuff out and commenting, or doing Menti still?
Lauren, what do you think? Sorry.
I think if we could take maybe 1 minute to put some things into Menti so that it's captured there, that would be great, John. And then we can follow up with shouting it out. Put it out in this space would be great too. We'll do a little column A, column B, you know? And great point from Jessica. You're also welcome to put any extra questions that you may have into the chat so that we can make sure to capture them and get to them. So I'd say if anyone wants to come off of mute at any point, you're feeling ready to speak it out into the space, please feel free to come off mute. If we were to go over to the Menti screen, will we start to be able to see everything populating? Cool. Sarah, I see your comment for environmental, wondering about urban heat islands and heat islands in general. Did you want to say anything else about that, or just a general wondering?
Yeah, I just think like when I think about the environmental, just like injustice things happening, at least in cities in Oregon, obviously like folks know here about how hot Portland got this summer and how it keeps getting hot. So just thinking about how that's impacting so many other pieces. So it feels important to include.
Thank you.
I think that's a great thought. I think if yeah, folks have thoughts or data sets that they know of on that topic, I'd love to hear them, but I'll look into it too.
I know there was a study done here in Oregon not that long ago, mapping the different heat islands in the state. I don't know how up to date it is. I can look into it. Somebody sent it to me not that long ago, and I'd be happy to forward it.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. I think immigration status would be a great one as well.
Would anyone else like to come off mute and speak about anything that you've listed here? Just as a reminder, the Menti won't close. So if you, I'm gonna continue adding now, but if we move on and you think of something else that you want to be included, feel free to add it to the Menti. We'll check it again as we are going through the process. And there will also be an open comment portal for other ideas and thoughts too if you lose this page.
And can I ask once more just about the single variable versus the bivariate maps, whether or not we thought those relationship maps were helpful or if they're more confusing? That's always just helpful for me to know as I create some visuals.
Sarah says, I think they're interesting.
Cool.
Looks like we're slowing down a little, but again, if people think of things, feel free to put it in there. And if you have thoughts about single variable versus bivariate maps and comes to you later, add that in there too. All right, Mariah, back over to you.
I actually think that's all I have. So I think you're wrapping up. Thank you.
Gosh, great. We're quite ahead of the schedule. So I'm also happy to use some of this time if there are other thoughts or questions, concerns, opinions that you would like to share at this point. I think this is like first thing in the morning for a lot of us. So sometimes it takes us a little second to wiggle into it, but I appreciate everything that we've heard today so far. Okay, I'm gonna keep us going. Mary, you wanna go to the next slide? So based on all of this feedback that y'all have given today, CETI and Odo will draft a written straw proposal for the additional analysis by the 31st of October. And working group members will have until the November 22nd to respond with written feedback. And we have that portal link that I'm going to put into the chat. So there's your, probably should have written along with that comment portal. There's more context. And we'll gather all of that. And I'll be following up with an email with information so that y'all can have all of this on hand because the chat goes away when we close it all. I don't know. Does anyone else have anything else? I really appreciate everyone's time today and continuing the conversation together. I've heard from most of you that you're interested in continuing to meet throughout the process, and so I'll probably send out another doodle poll once we have our next meeting steps together on our end so that we can figure out where and when and how to best chat next.
Hey, Lauren, I just want to thank everybody as well for taking the time to participate in this. Every time we do these meetings, I learn a ton of information that I hadn't thought about before. And I really appreciate everyone's input and thoughts and creative thinking. That is so helpful to us as we start to work through the ton of information that we're getting from you and others. And just encourage all of you too, that we're creating this space specifically to do things that you've indicated would be of interest to you, but we also know that there are other things that may occur to you. If you're like me, while I'm walking my dogs, I always get lots of thoughts then and wish I had access to my computer to write them down. And so if something else comes to you, please don't hesitate to use our portal, which Lauren posted in the chat, and just flag anything for us. We want to hear from you about all things, whether we're talking specifically about it here or not. So thank you.
Appreciate you all. Have a great rest of your day and week, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.